Okay, let's start our Shiur number 6 for the Tzurba Hilchot Shabbat series, using the Tzurba volume number 16, the Lax family edition, the Weiss family volume number 16, as we have started Hilchot Shabbos, and we are in part 2 of Tefillah, the Shiurim related to Tefillah. Last time we did Mincha, Kabbalah Shabbos, Ma'ariv, and Shachris, and we are up to Musaf. So today's Shiur will talk about Musaf and the Chiyuv of women for Musaf, Mincha, Ma'ariv, Motzi Shabbos, any mistakes that one makes in the Amida. Sometimes we start the weekday Shemona Esrei by mistake, and Tashlumin, if one has to make up any tefillah on Shabbos or after Shabbos. So let's get right into it. The tefillah of Musaf. So we know we spoke about the Ma'ariv, Kabbalah Shabbos obviously is a special tefillah of Shabbos, a special addition to tefillah. The Ma'ariv had a special version to it, and Shachris, we only have a 7 bracha Shmona Esrei, as we call it, the Amida, as we spoke about last time, in terms of finding sources for each of the tefillos. And the Gemara tells us that Musaf is an important tefillah with regard to a machlokas the Gemara quotes. The Gemara in Brachas Daf Chafav, source number 1, we're on page 229. 229 in the volume 16, and we start with source number 1. The Gemara in Brachas Chavav tells us the well-known machlokas, a double machlokas between, we're not going to focus on the machlokas about Tfilas Arvis Rishus or Chova now, but we'll focus on the other machlokas that's quoted, Itmar Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina Amar, Tfilas Avos Tiknum. Tfilos were enacted by the Avos, Avram Davin Shachris, Yitzchak Davin Mincha, and Yaakov Davin Ma'ariv. So that's the first opinion. Rabbi Shua ben Levi Amar, Tfilos Keneged Tmidim Tiknun. No, it's Keneged the Karbanos. Shachris is Tamid Shel Shachar, Mincha is Tamid Shel Ben Arbayim, and Ma'ariv is the leftover fats, the Hektar Chalav and Ve'evarim. That is the machlokas between Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina and Rabbi Shua ben Levi. The Gemara, though, has a maskana. The Gemara quotes a brisa to support each of the opinions, but then the Gemara says, Amar L'cha Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina, La'ol Amei Melachat Tfilos Avos Tiknum. It must be that it's Avos. Why? Vas B'china Rabbanan are Karbanos. And the Rabbanan connected it to Karbanos. Why? Dilote Mahachi. If you don't say that, Musaf, according to Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina, Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina says the Avos. So what do you do with Musaf? There's only 3 avos, and there's an extra tefillah. And if you say all the tefillos are keneged and av, there's only 3 avos. What do you do with musaf? So it must be that everybody agrees karbanos. And the question is there another element of avos as well? So there's a machlokes, but we end up saying that even Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina has to agree to a carbon element. There is a Zohar. There's a Zohar. I think Rabbi Yaakov ended on that Gemara, quotes the Zohar that says maybe Yosef is keneged musaf. Right, kabbalistically. Not going to get into that. But that's Yosef. Interesting, if you look in the Gemara, it seems to be a bona fide machlokas, though. And there's a brisa that supports each one, Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina and Rabbi Shua ben Levi. But if you look in the Rambam quotes both of these opinions. In Hilchos Tefillah, the Rambam quotes Keneged Timidim Tiknum, and in Hilchos Melachim, the Rambam quotes, this is not on your sheet, but the Rambam quotes in Perek Chi, the 9th Perek of Hilchos Melachim, that he quotes Avos. He quotes, that's the history of the mitzvahs. Al Shisha Dvarim Nitztavu Adam Arisha, and Adam got 6 mitzvahs, and Noach got an extra one. V'chein Adavar B'chal Ha'olam Ad Avraham. Nitztava Yeser Elu B'mila. And Avram got bris milah, v'hu his palel shachris. V'yitzchak kifresh meiser, v'hosef fila acheres lefnos hayom, what we call mincha. V'Yaakov hosef gid hanashe, v'his palel arvis. So the Rambam here quotes Avos. Rev Soloveitchik and the Maritz Chayes, 2 of the great latter achronim, ask, how could the Rambam quote both opinions? In Hilchos Tefillah he quotes Karbanos, in Hilchos Malachim he quotes Avos. The Gemara has it as a machlokas. How could you quote both? So they say the secret is the Rambam in Pirush Mishnayos and Chulin on Daf Kuf. With the Rambam there, without getting into the details there of Gid Hanashe, which we don't have time to get into right now, the Rambam says that there's the difference between the history of a mitzvah and why a mitzvah is obligatory upon us. Why do we have to do mitzvahs? Why do I have to do bris milah? Not because of Avraham. Why do I not eat Gid Hanashe? Not because the Shvatim didn't eat Gid Hanashe. All mitzvahs are obligatory upon Jews because Moshe Rabbeinu at Har Sinai gave it to us from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Moshe Kibel Torah Mi Sinai. Taryag mitzvahs Nermelo the Moshe Mi Sinai. It doesn't say 606 with 7 holdovers. We received the package at Har Sinai. Everything is from Har Sinai. But the history of a mitzvah can be before Har Sinai. but it's not the reason it's obligatory upon us. And that's the lashon the Rambam uses at the beginning of Hilchos Avel, quoting from a Gemara in Shabbos in a totally different context. But the Rambam borrows the phrase Nitna Torah v'nischatsha halacha. The Torah was given and halacha was renewed. And therefore, what happened before Matan Torah might not be exactly what happened after Matan Torah. The Rambam at the beginning of Hilchos Avel says, the brothers set Shiva, 7 days for Yaakov Avinu. But we hold Avelos was only 1 day, biblically, Midaraisa. How could that be? The brothers set Shiva. Nitna Torah v'nischat halacha. There's a newness. Because the history of a mitzvah, that's before Har Sinai. Why we have to do it, that's Har Sinai. And that's... The Rambam says that there by Gid Hanashe and by Bris Milah, and Rav Soloveitchik said it, and the Maritz Chayes connects it to Tefillah. Why do we daven? The obligatory, the Chazal made it connected to Karbanos. The history of mitzvos, that's Avos. And that's what the Rambam is talking about in Hilchos Malachim, Dafka, the history of mitzvos. That's clearly the context of what he says. So that's just a ha'ara about this machlokas. But now we get back to our discussion. That Musaf, the Gemara assumes, because there's Musaf, it must be that everybody agrees to some type of Karban connection. The tour describes that we daven Musaf in Siman Reish Pei Vav in source number 2. Oleachshus Yachzir HaSefer Yomar Shliach Tzibur Kaddish. After you bring do Kriyas HaTorah, which will be the next year, Kriyas HaTorah and Shnayim Mikra. V'Yispalu HaTzibur Tfilas Musaf, and we daven Musaf. The 3 regular brachas, Shalosh Rishonos, Shalosh Achronos, and then Kedushas Hayom Be'emsa. Svardim say L'Moshe Tzivisa. Ashkenazim say Tikanta Shabbos. Tikanta Shabbos, and the Achronim say that even Svardim say Tikanta Shabbos Bizman Hazeh, and the Torah says it's somehow connected to the Geula. The Geula, maybe the Beis Yosef explains, maybe it's, and the Aleph base is backwards. We're counting down. We're counting down to the Geula because we want to bring the Musaf in the Beis Hamikdash. Right, that's what the Beis Yosef says. Alpha Beis Elafisha Nishmas Al HaGeula VaGeula HaSida Lios B'Schus Shabbos. And Shabbos is connected to the Geula. I think we mentioned this last time about Imale Shamru Shtei Shabbosos Miyan Negalin. If we would keep Shabbos, we would immediately have a Geula. So Shabbos is connected to Geula. Musaf is the extra special tefillah that we have on Shabbos, and that's why we think about Geula during this time. How long? What's the time for Musaf? We know all the other tefillahs have a time. So we know Shacharis has a Zman tefillah, and Mincha has a beginning and ending Zman. What about Musaf? That's a Machlokas Tanaim. The Mishnah Maseches Brachas in source number 4, the beginning of the 4th parak, beginning of Tefillah HaShachar, V'shal Musafin Kol Hayom. The Tanna Kama says Musaf all day. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Ad Sheva shows 7th hour, an hour after Chatzos. Machlokas. What do we paskin? Try to do it by Chatzos. Try to do it by the 7th hour. V'shal Musafin Kol Hayom Amar Rabbi Yochanan V'nikra Posheya. Because the Gemara says on the next daf and daf Chav Ches that if somebody does it all day, you try to do it by the 7th hour. If you do it all day afterwards, Posheya. That's called negligence. We'll have to see exactly what negligence is. But clearly, the poskim say, the Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch say, Musaf should be davened before the 7th hour. Tfilas Musafin, says the Rambam, Zmana achar tfilas hashachar ad sheva shos bayom. The shear, the time is till the 7th hour. V'amispalo sa achar sheva shos. If you daven after the 7th hour, you're yotzei. But that clearly is at the time. Aval bishabasha yasi dechovaso. Zmana kol hayom. So it's interesting. Zmana kol hayom. But one should daven earlier. He says Zmana ad sheva shos bayom. And later on he says Zmana kol hayom. Zmana lachadchila ad sheva shos bayom. Even though if one was poshea, one could daven even later. Musaf, we'll see what Poshea Be'ez means in a minute, but as Tosfos notes in the beginning of the 4th parak there, Daf Chavav, where the Tosfos talks about, the Gemara talks about Tashlumin, making up tfilos that I missed. Tosfos notes that once the time for Musaf is done, I can't make it up. There's no Tashlumin for Musaf. Mincha could be Tashlumin, could be a makeup for Shachris, Ma'ariv for Mincha, Shachris for Ma'ariv, but Musaf is a different type of tefillah. Why? Musaf is, and the Gemara and Tosfos says we would apply. Ubazeh vadaim in source number 7, Tosfos and Brachas Daf Chavav, Avar Zmano Batal Karbano. Right? Once the Zman passes, so then I there's no way to make it up. I don't say if I can make it up by Mincha. Right? That's let's just go back to read the beginning of Tosfos. Lo boyim tav lo espalo tfilas musaf. The Gemara only asks if you forgot Shachris and Musaf, if you got Shachris and Mincha and Ma'ariv, can you make it up? But the Gemara doesn't ask about Musaf. To havada einam espalo ba'arvis. You can't make up Musaf in the next time frame. To heich yikras la karbanis for over zman Musaf. right? It's purely a parallel to the carbon. There is no extra element, the added element. We'll talk about this more by the Shem soon. Of boy rachmi, but it's just carbons. Therefore, if you miss the zman, there is no makeup, right? And this is all background. The Shulchan Aruch quotes this, that one should daven musaf before the 7th hour, b'di'evet even after the 7th hour, and there is no tashlumin. Zman tfilas musaf, says the Shulchan Aruch, in Siman Reish Pei Vav. Zman tfilas musaf miyad achar tfilas hashachar ve'ein la'achra yoser miyad sof zayin shos. Only an hour after chatzos. V'yimas palos achar sheva shos nikra posheya. That's negligence. V'yafal pikein yasi dechova, but you're still yotzei. You're still yotzei. B'bnei shezmana kol hayom. V'yim shachach v'lo espalach avar kol hazmana. If one forgot, ein la tashlumin. There is no tashlumin when it comes to musaf. Most of the time, this isn't a problem. Even if somebody has a long chazan, you're davening musaf on a regular Shabbos before the 7th hour. But where does it come up? Yom Kippur and Simchas Torah, right? Those are times where Shacharis is very long, and you might get to Musaf after the 7th hour. So is that called Posheya? Rabbi Yochanan, I don't want to be a Posheya. Do we all have to daven Vasikin and make sure we finish and start Musaf before the 7th hour? Maybe even finish Musaf before the 7th hour? So says Rav Rosner, says Shevet Alevi, no. What does Posheya mean? Posheya here doesn't mean mazid. You've been mazid, delayed. Posheya here means lazy, atzlus. Right? The Shevet Alevi says in source number 9, V'achanami b'didan denikra posheya ein ritzono. This is in Shevet Alevi, Chelek Tes. Right? Shevet Alevi, Rav Azar, was one of the last, if not the last Talmud that was alive who learned in Lublin, in Yeshivas Chachmei Lublin. So he says here in his Chuvas, ein ritzono lora posheya mezid, ela misatzel. It's lazy, that type of posheya. Kirashi and Izkaleel. V'kiva du rak keneged begeder misatzel. And if it's based on laziness, so what if you're davening all day until that moment? That's not lazy. To hadayin kama shos lefanav. To efshar od lispalat sofayom. You're not davening in the 11th hour. You have plenty of time left. You just davened after the 7th because you've been davening till now. V'yim kein b'yom ha'kipurim dema'achrim lo machmas atzlus. The reason that you're delaying by Yom Kippur is because you're involved in tefillah for many hours before that. That's not a posheya that is misatzel. You're not misatzel, right? You're doing exactly what you're supposed to be doing. That's a limud schus on the minhag. There's no reason to daven later, then you can't daven later. There are those that daven, and generally many shuls have a later minyan on Shabbos than during the week. This is based on Shulchan Aruch. The Ramah, I think, says, because there's a Mordechai in Shabbos that says, it says baboker on a weekday, and it only says baboker on Shabbos. So therefore you daven later. It doesn't mean that you daven after the zman. That's not to be understood that there's no zmani tefillah on Shabbos. It just means that you daven a little later. But the Shevet Alevi says, if we're davening, and that's why we have musaf later after the 7th hour, so then that is not a problem. What happens if somebody comes to shul and they come very late and the shul's up to musaf? Happens by women sometimes. We'll talk about women in a few minutes. Is there a way to daven musaf before shacharis? Let's say it's before sof zman tefillah shacharis. So what do we say? Could you daven musaf before? Says the Mishnah Berurah in Reish Pei Vav in Arachayim, source number 10. Aser, I'm on page 233. Aser lahaktim shum karban lechadchila lekarban tamid shel shachar. We know karbanos, keneged karbanos, aleh hashleim. There's a halacha. The tamid shel shachar has to be the first karban. The tamid shel ben abayim has to be the last karban. Maybe one exception to the rule. That's it. Karban pesach. But other than that, it's got to be in between. So that's why the musaf, which is connected, the carbon musaf should be after shacharis, which is the tamid shel shachar. B'di'eved, you a yotzei. It's not mamish like that carbon that if you did it beforehand. B'di'eved, you a yotzei, says the Mishnah Berurah. But what do you do in this case? Is there any kiyum of getting tefillah b'tzibur? They're about to daven musaf. Should you daven musaf with them and then daven shacharis? So the Minchas Yitzchak Dayan Weiss assumes no. No, shacharis before musaf overrides tefillah b'tzibur. Overrides tefillah b'tzibur. He quotes from some achronim that thought otherwise, but they say it overrides. There's a lot in the seder of the tefillah that is magical and kabbalistic and does amazing things in Shamayim. And we can't just take it lightly, taking stuff out. That's what the Piskei Teshuvos quotes in source number 12, based on a pasuk in the Medrash. And he says, V'yesh l'seder hazeh ta'amim al pi nigla v'al pi nistar. There are hidden and secret meanings. Dafka in this order. Rav Pinkus writes in one of his seforim also, all of Tefillah has a specific order. Right, Psuki de Zimra, and Birchas Kriyashma, and davening, and then the end, and Ashrei, and Uvalet Tzion, and Aleinu, and the Yom, everything builds. It's a beautiful, amazing pyramid with a foundation, with first floor and second floor, and going up and up. And if we fool around with it and take some out, he says, gives the mashal. Maybe I've mentioned this before. He gives the mashal. Let's say your washing machine is not working. So what do? You take out your tool bag, and you go and you unscrew here and you unscrew there, and you open up the back, and you look inside, and you're like, no, everything looks good. You tinker around, and then after a few minutes, you look inside. Okay, you put everything back, and you close it up, and then you're about to turn it back on, and then all of a sudden there are a couple of screws that are still on the carpet next to where you are, and your wife says, "What are those?" And you say, they're extra. I don't need them. The person who made the washing machine obviously thinks that you need them. They think that it's not extra, right? But I could cut it out. So we think, Ashrei, Psuka de Zimras, right? Baruch Shamar Ashrei Yishtabach. First halacha that we learn. Hallelujah. So when I have time, says the Rav Pinkus, there's a structure that's crucial. And that's what the Piskei Teshuvos is quoting here. There's a structure. You can't just say, I'll do Musa before Shachris. No. It's got to be in order for it to have its tremendous power. So that is in terms of the Chiyuv of Musaf. What about women? So it was discussed, I think, in earlier Shiurim in terms of the mitzvah of tefillah in general by women. Women have a chiyuv to daven. What do they have to daven? Different opinions. The Mishnah Berurah and other poskim say Shachar and Mincha. They would never makav ma'ariv, but they have a chiyuv to daven. What about Musaf? So, says the Noda B'Yehuda in the Tzlach. The Tzlach is the Noda B'Yehuda's commentary on Shas. The Noda B'Yehuda's name was Rav Yecheskel Landau, chief rabbi in Prague. He named his two major seforim after his parents. His father's name was Yehuda, Noda B'Yehuda, those were his shuvas, and his mother's name was Chaya. So the Tzlach stands for Tziyun L'Nefesh Chaya. So the Tzlach there in Brachos and Daf Chavav, where it talks about the Tefilos, the Tzlach comes up with a chiddush and says, I think women are exempt, do not have to daven musaf. L'chein ani omer, shekivnu b'ma shani mistapek, im tfilas ha-musaf v'noeges b'nashim. I'm not sure if it's noeg b'nashim. Shaharei hi mitzvahs aseh, shazman grama. It's zman grama, it's only by day. I want to say up to the 7th hour according to some, but it's for sure only by day. And even though tefillah, even if you want to say tefillah is drabanan, and for sure the details of tefillah, and if you already daven once already today, it's drabanan. Still, there are Rishonim that say Tosas Aschaf, even a mitzvah say drabanan shazman grama. Women are peturos. Eloshe betefillah chivinu rabanan kivan derachmin inhu. But the other tefillos, the rabbanan say you're still chayiv because it has an element of asking for compassion, rachmi. Musaf doesn't have that. Musaf only has one element, keneged the karbanos. There's no bakashas in Musaf, and therefore it's pure zman grama, and therefore women would be peturos. That's what the Tzlach says. Awal tfilas Musaf sheinena rachmi kimavur b'Rabbeinu Yonakan telakach ein la tashlumin. That's why there's no tashlumin, because there's not rachmi, like Tosfos we saw before. Women are peturos from davening musaf. Can they? For Ashkenazim, for sure. But that's the shita of the Tzlach. Rabbi Kiva Eger has another reason. Why women should be peturos. In a very creative pshat, Rabbi Kiva Eger in the Chuvas, he says in Siman Tes, L'chora nira, in source 14, the nashim peturos mitfilas musaf, the kivan the nashim lo hayu shoklos, ein lam chilek b'karbanas sipur. Women don't give towards the machzas hashekel. The machzas hashekel is what contributes to the karbanas tzibur. So again, the other karbanos have an element of rachmi, but here this is a pure carbon sibur. Tfilas musaf is keneged the carbon musaf, and not keneged the avos as we saw before. And therefore, since women are not obligated to give machzas shekel, they are not included in the carbon musaf, and therefore they're patur. And he says so too. I saw in the Tzurba Volume Rosh, which is itself a whole historical controversy that it was Tzurba Rosh. They thought was the Rush for a couple hundred years, and they realized it was all a fake. But that is the sheet there. Rabbi Akiva Eiger says that because women are paturas from Maksas HaShekel, so they're paturas from Karban Musaf too. Rabbi Yitzchak Elchanan in the Be'er Yitzchak, Rabbi Yitzchak Inspector, the great Kovna Rav. He was the Rav in Kovna for 30 years, 19th century. Right? He lived from 1817 to 1896. He was very involved in many major landmark psakim, especially regarding Agunas and others. So in the Be'er Yitzchak of his Chuvas, he says, excuse me, Rabbi Akiva Eiger, he says, I don't think that's right. If you're not chayiv in Machzas HaShekel, so then you're not going to be chayiv in Musaf? And what about Kohanim and Leviim? What about Kohanim and Leviim? What about Ketanim, which according to many Rishonim, Machzas HaShekel is only from age 20. So if you're 18 years old, you don't have to daven Musaf? Says Rabbi Yitzchak, I don't like that equation. I don't like that equation of Machzas HaShekel and Karban Musaf. No. Karban Musaf is Musaf. And the Karban Musaf is separate from the Machzas HaShekel. Says the Be'er Yitzchak. Lo nehira, he quotes Rabbi Akiva Eiger, and he says, the nashim beturos bitfilas musaf v'shalo hayushoklos. Lo nehirali, I don't think it's true. I don't think it's true, because if you look in Menachas, Daf Chaf Aleph talks about shkalim, right? Kol kohen sheshokol eno chote, al pidin peturim heima mishkalim, kohanim don't have to give. Ukamo menachchein leviim. And so too, ketanim less than 20, or to kohanim leviim, ketanim b'chuzim ben chav, yipatu b'musaf? No. It's not connected directly. Ella al karchach, says Rabbi Yitzchak Elchanan. Muchach de'ein tfilas hamusaf tali b'shkalam klal. Tfilas musaf are not tali. There's no connection between the Matzah Shekel. And women are obligated to daven musaf. It's not connected to the Matzah Shekel. That reason doesn't apply. He doesn't quote the Slach's reason, but at least the Rabbi Akiva Eiger's reason, he thinks it's wrong. This discussion sounds similar. Those might be thinking, it might be familiar a little bit to what Tosas and Brachas asks. Right? The Gemara has a suffix, totally different context, but the Gemara has a suffix on Daf Chafim Abeis and Brachas, whether women are obligated in benching Midaraisa or Midarabanan. And the Gemara has a suffix about it. Why would women, it's not a Zman Grama, it's food Grama. Why would women not be obligated in benching Midaraisa? So Tosfos, the Rashi says, because we have to mention in benching Eretz Yisrael. Eretz Chemda Tov Rechava. And they didn't take a portion in Eretz Yisrael. Tichsiv al Aretz Tov Asher Nasan Lach, the Aretz Lo Nidna Lenakevas L'Schalik. But no Slavchad, they got that because of Slavchad, not because of themselves. Ask Tosfos, what? 1 second. Everybody who did not take a portion in Eretz Yisrael is going to be patur from benching. What about Kohanim and Leviim? What about Gerim? Right, the question whether they took. So Tosfos says, Kohanim and Leviim Nami Libosh, Lo Nadu Chelik Ba'aretz. So they shouldn't be able to be Motzi Achir Midei Chavasim because they're only Chai Midrabanan? Tosfos says, no. The question by women is because they're not included in Talmud Torah or Bris Milah, which also have to be mentioned. But it's a similar kind of thing, similar kind of discussion about that. What the Be'er Yitzchak asked on Rabbi Akiva Eiger is what Tosfos asked on Rashi there in Brachas and Daf Chaf. So, 1 second. Rabbi Akiva Eiger knew this too, no? Kohanim and Leviim, he didn't think of that kasha. Right, he said women, because they're not obligated to Matzah Shekel, they don't have to have in Musaf. So would Rabbi Akiva Eiger say that Kohanim and Leviim are patur from Musaf? So of course not. So the Stipler in the Kilas Yaakov in Zvachim, in source number 16, he says maybe there's a big chilik. Don't compare, this is to defend Rabbi Akiva Eiger against the question of the Be'er Yitzchak. There's a difference between Kohanim and Leviim and women. Because there is an element of giving Matzah Shekel towards the Karban, that's true. But there's also another element of, are you part of the tzibur regarding karbanos? And even if Kohanim and Leviim aren't obligated to Matzah Shekel, but they're part of the tzibur for the karban. For example, let's say for some reason the karban wasn't brought, and they have to figure out a way to bring the karban. Who's responsible to make sure the karban is brought? Klal Yisrael, including the Kohanim and the Leviim. They're included in the kapara, so to speak, in the power of the tzibur for karban tzibur, even if they don't have to give Matzah Shekel. Women might not be even included in tzibur for that halacha. Women are included in tzibur for other halachas, but maybe not for that halacha. Says the Stipler in source 16, Denira, the mitzvah zakravas karban tzibur, o mitzvah shkalim, trei inyanim heim. It's two elements, the idea of hakravas karban and the mitzvah shkalim. The chi of hakravas karban tzibur, ramya al kol tzibur. The mitzvah of hakrovas hakorban that falls upon the shoulders of all the tzibur, including Kohanim and Leviim. Ve'ilu yitzuyar shashkalim eina maspikim. If you come up with a case that the shkalim wouldn't be enough for all the karban tzibur, so they'd have to give more. The Kohanim and Leviim would have to chip in. V'din shkalim in yanacherhu. Even kishayesh b'lishka mo's harbi, if there's plenty of money in the lishka and you don't need it, there's still a mitzvah machzah shekel, and that the Kohanim Leviim would be patur from. But nashim, women, yesh lomer the kamosha b'tura mishkalam anami b'tura meikra mitzvah that gravis tibidin musafin. And therefore, it's a zman grama, and therefore they would be patur. So it's a major machlokas. The Mishnah Berurah quotes two opinions. He doesn't paskin. The Mishnah Berurah in Siman Kuvav in source 17, v'tfilas musafin bitzlach kasav the beturos the Noda Yehuda aval b'safik magin giborim pasuk techayavo. So it's a machlokas. Rav Rosner, Rabbi Shalom Rosner say that women have accepted daven musaf. Most women daven musaf. Rav Yitzchak Yosef, Rav Malamed say that women are not obligated, though they can if they want. If you look in the Yalkut Yosef, his lashon is, if they daven, ein limchos biyadan. Sounds like if you would ask him, should women daven, they shouldn't. If they do, they have what to rely on. Generally, Sfardim are less flexible in terms of brachos and tfilos of women. For brachas on a minhag, you don't make. Brachas on a zman grama, women generally don't make a bracha on a zman grama. So here, the mitzvah is the tefillah, and it might be zman grama. So again, yish miyam alismoch, they say, but not to do maybe l'chadchila. Except the Yalkut Yosef says musaf of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, because that has a rachmi element. Rabbi Shalom Rosner shall call panim chayavos l'spala musaf shel Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippurim mishum derachmei ninu. So this takes us musaf and women regarding musaf. So now let's talk about another element, another halacha relating to musaf, and that is, what about eating after musaf? Eating after shachris before musaf. Eating after shachris before musaf. What is the halacha? So we mentioned already last week that the chiyuv of kiddush does not kick in before shachris. There's no chiyuv of kiddush. We spoke about what if a woman davens a little bit, she's not going to daven. But the chiyuv of kiddush kicks in only after shachris. So is one allowed to eat then? Is one allowed to eat before musaf? So the Gemara has a couple of opinions about this. Brachas Chavches, there's a story there that Abaya wanted to talk to Rav Avia why he didn't go to Rav Yosef's Shiur, and Rav Avia mentioned he wasn't feeling well, and Rav Avia wanted to not eat before musaf because that's what Rav Huna says. Asur lo adam sheyitom klum kodem sheyispal tfilas musaf. So the Gemara goes back and forth, and me'ikar adin, we paskin, one is allowed to. One is allowed to eat before musaf. The Shulchan Aruch says in Reish Pei Vav, mutter litom kodem tilas musafin. It's mutter. It's mutter to taste something. Notice the lashon litom. Litom kodem tilas musaf. Remember, we want to daven musaf not so late in the day, and there are separate halachas about not doing so many things. So I might forget. I might push it off. But the Shulchan Aruch says you could eat before musaf ta'ima ta'inu achilas peris. O afilu pasmuat. And the Shulchan Aruch says even some fruit or a little bit of bread, afilu te'ima sheish b'kdei lisod alev, in order to keep your heart going. Aval suda aser, but don't have a whole suda. Don't have a whole suda. Fine, so you could eat before musaf, but don't have a whole suda. So this is a problem in halacha. Why is it a problem in halacha? Because we know we're going to learn about Hashem in the future shiurim. There's a concept called kiddush b'makom suda, which is going to talk to us about the what, the when, and the where. Kiddush is going to be in the place. It's going to talk about what, and it's going to talk about when, how long, in proximity. But there's a concept that you have to eat when you make kiddush. You have to have suda. So what does the Shulchan Aruch say? You're allowed to eat, which means pashtus you should make kiddush before you eat, but you're not allowed to have suda. You're not allowed to have suda before musaf. So how does that work? How are you allowed to eat? And that means making kiddush and have suda. So the different approaches. Different approaches exactly what to do regarding that. The question is, maybe you can have something that's called a suda that's not a real suda. That's how generally we try to do it. The Magen Avram there in Reish Pei Vav says, "V'yaf agav da'asur," source 21. "V'yaf agav da'asur lechol kodem kiddush. V'yein kiddush al makam suda." You're gonna have to make kiddush and kiddush makam suda. Yeshlomer the dain kishis to kos yain achrav. Have a whole cup of wine. If you have a whole cup of wine, that counts for suda. That counts for suda. Or sheyitom peiros v'yispalo b'mkomo v'yachol achar gachpas. Eat fruit, but then daven and eat your suda after musaf right there. Okay, usually not so common. The Mishnah Berurah quotes, "Have some mizonos." Have some mizonos, because that, according as we'll see in a future shiur, that counts for suda. According to the Gaonim, even though it's not a full su'uda that you're going to have later, not bread. So that's what the Mishnah Berurah says in Reish Pei Vav. Pasmu what the hainu kibetza. To call zeu b'chlal achilas arai. That's all called arai. V'kol shekin emochel mine targima mechameshes aminim deshari. You could have mizonos, and that's what the Shmir Shabbos quotes. The Shmir Shabbos in source 23 says, in the name of Rabbi Shalom Zalman, that he was makel that you could have even mizonos, even more than a kibetza, which would require an ala michya. Why? Because what's the whole issue here of eating more than that close to a Suda? The whole issue is the forgetting Musaf, but if you're with a group and everybody's going to daven, so then there's no worry. You can eat even a little more. Right? The minhag on Simchas Torah, on other Rosh Hashanah, sometimes there are the kihilos that eat and they make an ala michya. Right? So that's this. V'pradim zeh barabim demitri adadi kamo b'simchas Torah. Good. What happens if somebody doesn't have any wine and he's really feeling weak? He's really feeling weak. So the Mishnah Berurah says, so you could have fruit even without saying Kiddush. Remember, this is the daytime. Kasab Elio Rabba, Vuva Bashari Tshuva, Tim Chalash Libo Vein Lo Yayin, Velo Shar Davar Lakadish Love. You have nothing to make Kiddush on, Rashoy Lechol Peiros, Vodimine Targima, even a little Mizonos, even without Kiddush. Only if you're really not feeling well. Balav Hachi Ein Lo Hakel. Balav Hachi Ein Lo Hakel. What exactly is this about? So there is a day, it doesn't quote it, but there is a machlokus bishonim whether there's an issur to eat before Kiddush on Shabbos morning. On Friday night, the Kiddush Daraisa, so then for sure there's an issur of even water. But Shabbos morning, there's a machlokus, there's a ravid. So if you're mitzarif that in a situation where you don't feel well, so then maybe one could be meko. There's an added element, let's say on the Simchas Torah case, about duchening Birchas Kohanim. Because we know a Kohen is not allowed to duchen, is not allowed to say Birchas Kohanim if he has had a revius of wine. That is but somewhere between 85 and 150 milliliters, or between 3 and 5 fluid ounces. So, unless till the effects of the wine have passed. So in that case, what do you do? What do you do if you want to make Kiddush and you want to duchen afterwards? So easy way is to have less than a revius. But you got to eat other things. Maybe that will be mitzarif. Have somebody else make Kiddush for you. Use grape juice. There are other ways to get out of it, to allow the Kohen to still duchen in that way. Can you eat without Kiddush? So Rav Avadia, the Yalkut Yosef, suggests yesh lahatilo lutom kodem tefillas Kiddush. Maybe because he wants to duchen, maybe skip the Kiddush. Some say there is no chiyah before daven musaf. The mutter lutom kodem kiddush rabba. Some say, as I just mentioned from the Ravid, there's no issur of eating before the kiddush in the morning. So he says in a classic Yosef style, Rav Yosef, Ravadi does this a lot. Svek sveka, based on two machlokas aposkim. Maybe there's no chiyuv of kiddush until after musaf, and even if there's no chiyuv right now, maybe there's no issur of eating before kiddush. So that's svek sveka. He relied on it. He said one can rely on in terms of duchening after. So this is in terms of eating. I would add that in general, this is for Simchas Torah, for Rosh Hashanah. This should not be done on a regular Shabbos. Rahman al-Itzlan, we live in a time where in some places there is something called a Kiddush Club, something that a group of people that do not want to hear what the Navi has to say, and therefore they go out and leave the Torah with the rest of the people, and the Navi, that could be the only time that we learn Navi the whole week, and they go out, which is a zilzul of the Navi, zilzul of Tefillah, zilzul of Pesach Knesses. There are so many things wrong with it, but that's not when. None of these kulas apply there, and one should not rely on it. And obviously one shouldn't be taking part in these groups. We can be at a game for 4 hours and not take a break. We're in shul for 2.5 hours. No, we have to push ourselves. And make sure we take it seriously. Okay, so this is Musaf and women and Musaf and eating before Musaf. So now we'll move it on to Mincha. Now we move on to Mincha of Shabbos, which is the next tefillah. The Kolbo notes that we say Ashrei, and then we have Uvalatzion. So it was wow, we never say Uvalatzion by Mincha, but we didn't say it in the morning, so we're kind of making it up. The Kolbo says we don't say it in the morning because of Tircha de Tzibura. We don't want to drag out so much. So we save Uvalatzion for Mincha time. So you say Kedusha de Sidra, we say it by Mincha time. Then we have Uvalatzion, then we have Kaddish, and then we have Va'anis Filasi Lacha. So the Mishnah Berurah quotes this. The Va'anis Filasi, the Kolbo continues, says, why do we say that bracha? Va'anis Filasi Lacha, my tefillah to you. So the Kolbo quotes the Amar David Lefnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. David says to Hashem in source 27, Ribbona Shalom, Umos ha'olam v'rov b'nei Yisrael osim mishtos u'mishtakrin b'yom simchascham. Right? Any other nation that has a holiday, what would they look like after that during the holiday? They would drink, they would be merry, and they'd be on the couch. And you gave us a day of simcha. I'm not throwing you behind my back. I'm not forgetting spirituality. I'm using this day to rejoice and to connect and go to you. Even though I ate, and even though I'm full, and even though I'm into Gashmias also, and that's that pasuk. Right, it reminds us of the story of Levi Yitzchak. Remember, Levi Yitzchak was the one called Nidre night, and he was about to do Kol Nidre, and he starts running around the shul and looking onto the benches and looking in the closet and looking everywhere. They're like, what is he doing? What's he doing? Rabbi Levi Yitzchak is running and looking by the bima, looking all over the shul. Rebbe, what are you looking for? And finally, after a few minutes, he goes to the bima, gives a clap on the bima, and he says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you gave Klal Yisrael a mitzvah to eat today. The only weekday midah oraisa that there's a mitzvah to eat midah oraisa, Erev Yom Kippur. If you gave any other nation a mitzvah to eat and drink, what would they look like at the end of that day? They'd be drunk. They'd be lying down under the benches. They'd be in the closet. I looked. There's not one Jew lying on the floor. There's not one Jew in the closet. Everyone is here, serious, focused, ready for the Yom HaKadosh Hazeh. So that's exactly what we say. V'anis tefilasi l'cha. Every Shabbat, Hashem, our tefillah is to you. Good. And then we have Kriyas HaTorah, and we lane the first aliyah of the next week's parsha. Rav Nevin Zal has an unbelievably beautiful idea. Why do we do this? Why do we lane next week's parsha? It's from Ezra HaSofer. So Rav Nevin Zal says, because Ezra, remember, lived at a time, it was the Jews were just coming back to Eretz Yisrael, and it wasn't a simple time for Klal Yisrael. So Ezra wanted to give hope. Ezra wanted to say, there's always a next week's parsha. You just had a day, Shabbos is almost over. There's always next week's parsha. A Jew always looks ahead. There's always next week. So that's a powerful message that we get every time we lane next week's parsha, because Jewish history continues, goes to the future. The Mishnah Berurah continues and says after that we have Kaddish. We don't say Kaddish after the laning because we just piggyback that with the Kaddish that we're going to have before the Amidah. One always needs a Kaddish before and after Shemona Esrei. Before the Amidah, we have the Chatzi Kaddish. And let's say in Shachris, we have it a little bit before because you need Birchas Kriyash Shema Kriyash Shema, Svichas Gula Tefillah. So you bump up the Kaddish. By Mincha, you have the Kaddish. By Ma'ariv, you have the Kaddish. You always need a Kaddish before and a Kaddish afterwards for Kaddish Tiskabel. That Kaddish Tiskabel is Hashem accept our Tefillah. Tiskabel. What's the Kaddish beforehand? Right, if you look at the end of that Mishnah Berurah, source 29, La'olam Roi Lahasvich HaKaddish L'Tfilas Yudches. You're always supposed to have the Kaddish close to the Amidah. Mashein came b'Shachris. Shachris you can't. Yeshefsek Ba'amiris Ashrei B'Tayim. What's the message? So if Soloveitchik, many Mefarshim talk about there are different types of Kaddishes. There's Kaddish Tiskabel that performs a function like we just said. There's Kaddish Yasom. There's Kaddish Derabanan, right? That's after one learns Torah. And then what's the Chatzi Kaddish? Chatzi Kaddish. We say Chatzi Kaddish before the Shemona Esrei, before Baruch Hu. Says Rav Soloveitchik, if you look in one of the Yartzeit Shiur, in the second volume, in the one entitled Psukei de Zimra, Kaddish is a mitzarif. Kaddish is whenever we have to create a tzibur, the Kaddish binds us together. How? Because Kaddish needs a minyan. You can't say Kaddish in private. So the whole Psukei de Zimra, really, you could have said in private. So you're not really a tzibur yet. That doesn't show anything. But you need to become a tzibur before you daven together. The Shemona Esrei, you can really do by yourself. So how do you know this isn't just a bunch of Yechidim davening together versus a tzibur? That's the Kaddish, the Chatzi Kaddish. Before Shemona Esrei, that's the Mitzarif. Because you can't do Kaddish without a tzibur. So once you're doing the Kaddish, it creates the tzibur, and then the tzibur is there for Shemona Esrei. So afterwards, it is a tefillah bit tzibur, classic Rav Soloveitchik style. But that's what he says in the Shir L'Zecher Abamari. Ki kol pe'ula hadoresha tzibur ma'achedes es hayechidim l'chativa achas shel tzibur. That's Rav Soloveitchik. That's what you have to have Kaddish as the lead-in. So that's what you do here. You have Kaddish going into the Shemona Esrei, then you have the Shemona Esrei Mincha, Ata Echad. I saw recently, I think also in Rav Nevin Zal Sefer on Shabbos, that we say, Bayamahu Yeh Hashem Echad Shmo Echad. In the future, Hashem should be Echad. At the end of Shabbos, we have a little clarity of that Olam Haba. We say Ata Echad, V'Shimcha Echad. We say right now, we call him Echad. It's not just Bayamahu Yeh Hashem Echad. The end of Shabbos is a bechina of Olam Haba, and therefore we say Ata Echad right now. And then we have Tzidkas Chatzedek. We say 3 psukim of Tziduk Hadin. Sounds like what we do at a levaya. We're matzdik the din. 3 psukim from Tehillim about tziduk hadin. Why do we do this? The Abu Draham in source 31 says, because just at that time is when the Gehenim, at the end of Shabbos, Gehenim opens its doors again. Right? Over Shabbos, there's a respite. Gehenim is closed and all the neshamas go out. But at the end of Shabbos, we say tziduk hadin al poshim sha'asidim lachzor ledinam achar hashlamas haseder matzdikin asadin al dinam hachozer. That is the Abu Draham. If you look on the tour, he specifies something else. Now, Moshe Rabbeinu was nifter late Shabbos afternoon. So we're matzdik the din on Moshe Rabbeinu. If you look in the Shulchan Aruch Harav, he adds on Moshe, Yosef, and David. All three were nifter on that day. If this is the case, it gets a little tricky. The Bach talks about this in that Siman in Reis Stadi Beis, because we know there's a medrash that says that Moshe Rabbeinu wrote 13 Sifrei Torah on the day that he died. So if it was Shabbos, he couldn't have written the Sifrei Torah on the day that he died. So you could say it's a machlokas midrashim, or the Bach suggests that maybe he really died on Erev Shabbos. He died on Erev Shabbos. That's when he wrote the Sifrei Torah. But he was buried. Hashem buried him the next day. V'efshal Liyashiv, says the Bach, 34. Devadai Liyashiv and midrashim. Devadai be'erev Shabbos meis Moshe. Ubo bayom mal'u yamav ushnosav. V'kasav Yud Gimel Sifrei Torah. He wrote the 13. Avok furaso b'gai shekavar Kadosh Baruch Hu. That was on the Yom HaMenucha. That was on Shabbos. Okay, so either way, the Shulchan Aruch says we say tzidkascha. Source 35. Omrim tzidkascha, unless it's a day that we don't say tachnun. V'mchal bo yom she'ilu hayachol lo hayomrim bo b'mincha d'milas apayim ein omrim tzidkascha. There are different minhagim, Nusach Ashkenaz, Nusach Sfard, about the order of the psukim. Nusach Sfard has it in the order of how the psukim appear in Tehillim. Right, that's the Nusach Sfard order, says the Piskei Tshuvos. But the Nusach Ashkenaz switches the order because they want to Tzedek Sedek, the first one, V'sorascha emes, that's a reference to Moshe. We want Moshe to be first, that's the Torah. And then, Tzedkascha Elohim, Asher Asisa Gedolos, like Yosef was, Einenu Gadol B'bayis Hazeh. It's a reference to Yosef, and then we have the reference to David in the last. So, there's symbolism to the order, either in the order that it appears in Tehillim, or not. Okay, that's the order. Getting back to the halacha about tachnun, so again, we don't say it on a day that we don't say tachnun. In the Yalkut Yosef, in source 38, he's not convinced that it's every time you don't say tachnun. If it's a calendaric date that you don't say tachnun. But what if there's a chassan in shul? If there's a tzaddik in shul, then you should say tzidkascha. The Kaf HaChaim thinks otherwise. He thinks no. The Machlokes Sfardi poskim in terms of that. The minhag of Ashkenazim, I think, is not to say tzidkascha whenever you wouldn't say tachnun at that moment. Good. So that's mincha. So we did musaf and women musaf and eating before musaf and mincha. And now we are up to Ma'ariv. Ma'ariv on Motzi Shabbos. Ma'ariv on Motzi Shabbos. We don't try not to rush out. The Shulchan Aruch's language is ma'achrin. That's why we have v'hinoam, to push it off a few seconds too. Ma'achrin Tefilat Shabbat. You push it off a little bit, says the Shulchan Aruch. K'dei lahosef michal al hakodesh. To be mosif. Right? We try to extend. We spoke about Tosefes 2 weeks ago. Rabbi Yossi says in the Shabbos Kuf Yud Ches, where he talks about the things that he was proud of about himself. Yehei chelki mimachnisei Shabbos b'Tveria u'motziei Shabbos b'Tzipori. I hope my chelek is with those who bring in Shabbos in Tveria, because that's early. It's in a valley, so therefore the sun gets hidden from vision earlier, and Motzi Shabbos Tzipori, and Tzipori that was up on top. So they kept Shabbos a little later, so that's why they ended Shabbos later. So again, in the days of old, there was no luach, so you have to look where the sun is. We mentioned in the past, with Shlomo Zalman, also maybe paskin this way, even in terms of Lamaisa, in terms of where you are in the Yerushalayim, if you live in the valley, so it gets darker sooner. So Rav Nevenzel talks about that from Shlomo Zalman too. But either way, we have to be careful to try to be Mamshech Shabbos. The Piskei Tshuvos has very strong lashon. Ve'elu ha'omdim ha'chenim chashecha b'choser savlanos, those who stand at the border with a lack of patience. U'b'sfiras kochavim, are there 3 stars? Yes, Shabbos is over. Chas v'shalom. Masai kfar tetzi Shabbos kfar tzavchu aleim shu'avon plili. It's terrible. Hashem gives us a gift, and we're ready. We can't wait to see it gone. Ubi zayon l'Shabbos shenir alav ketorach zulas magam choli. If there's a chole, shar ones, tzorach mitzvah. But other than that, we should try to extend Shabbos if we can. So we daven Ma'ariv, not early if possible, and then we have Havdalah. So Havdalah on a coast, we'll talk about that by the Shem in a future shiur. But we have Havdalah in Tefillah, right in the first weekday bracha, so to speak. Right? That's what the Gemara says in Brachas Lama Gimel in source 43. Why do you do Havdalah b'chonin adas my time? Why do you do Havdalah in the first bracha? So two reasons the Gemara quotes. Amar of Yosef, mitoch shi chachma kavua beberchas chachma. Number one, atachonin, to know the difference between Shabbos and weekday, it takes discernment. It takes das. So that's why you put it in the bracha of das, because das, in order to make Havdalah, you have to have das. And number two, v'Rabbanan amri mitoch shi yichol leficha kavua beberchas chol. It's the first weekday bracha, as we just said. So the first weekday bracha gets the Havdalah of the Tefillah. This wasn't always the case. The Gemara tells us about a history that they used to switch off between Havdalah in davening, what we call Atachot Antanu, and Havdalah on the coast. The Gemara says there in Brachas Lama Gimel, source 44. Betchila kavua betfila. First they said do Havdalah in davening. Has Shiur, but then they got more money, and therefore they had enough money to make Havdalah on wine. So kavua on the coast. They said, okay, do it on the coast. But then they got poor again. So they said, okay, do it in tefillah. And they said, back and forth and back and forth. You know what the poskim say? We don't want any more of this going back and forth. The Shulchan Aruch Harav says, the Balatanya, Kedei shelo yehi havdalah mitalteles tadir. That Havdalah isn't taken around from here to there and here to there. Al yidei osher va'oni, based on the financial status of the Jewish people. Mitfila l'kos v'kos l'tfila. His chinuch hachamim, that you always do it both. Always do it both. Maybe we'll talk about the lumdis in a future shiur, about what's the purpose. Maybe there's a different purpose for the Havdalah on the coast and the Havdalah in tefillah. But either way, this is what we do. If one forgets ata chonantanu, then we know one does not repeat. It's okay. You can finish the tefillah right when you said chonan adas. You're done. So you finish the tefillah and you just mavdil on the coast. The Gemara does say though that if you forgot ata chonantanu and you ate before Havdalah, then you have to repeat Shmona Esrei. That's a knas. Based on the Gemara, there's a Gemara that says Ta Bezu Bazu, different ways to understand that Gemara, but that's the way that the summary Rishonim understand it, and as quoted in the Shulchan Aruch, that if one forgets Atachan Antanu and then one eats before Havdalah, then one would have to repeat. Okay, one Mishnah Berurah does point out in source 47, if somehow one makes Havdalah before you daven Ma'ariv, then you would still say Atachan Antanu. Right? It's not like if somebody davens Ma'ariv before they bench by Shal Shudis, so then you would not say Ritzeh anymore. But here you would still make say Havdalah in Shmona Esrei. Tzorach mikavach tzorach lahavdol b'tefillah gamkein in chonein hadas. Good. So two more points, two more topics to mention. Number one, what about mistakes? If somebody made a mistake in davening, we spoke about all the tefillos now. All the tefillos are done. What if somebody makes a mistake? Says so the root of this is the Gemara Brachas Daf Chaf Aleph. The Gemara says, Hani b'nei beirav the Torah midkri techol b'Shabbos. Right? We think this is a new phenomenon that we'll be davening on Shabbos and all of a sudden we'll bang our chest by Slach Lanu. We'll think, oi, hope nobody saw. This happened in the Gemara too. The Gemara says those b'nei beirav, the yeshiva boys that daven chol on Shabbos. Ma'osh yigmeru. What if they're in the middle of Shmona Esrei and they remembered? What do you do? Says the Gemara, Gomer nekol osa bracha. You're in the middle of Takab Shofar, or usually Slach Lanu, or finish the bracha. Finish the bracha, then go back to Atakidashta, or Yisbach Moshe. Finish the bracha. Why? Why finish the bracha? If you're davening at Tfilas Nedava, the Gemara says there, you got to stop where you are if you remember you davened already. Says the Gemara, because really fundamentally, the weekday Shmona Esrei is appropriate on Shabbos. But Tircha de Tzibura, Chazal didn't make us say the whole Shmona Esrei. But really, it's appropriate. So if you're in the middle of a bracha, so finish the bracha. Finish the bracha. And that's why that is the halacha. If somebody's in the middle of a bracha, so it feels kind of strange, but you finish the bracha and then you go back. That's the Shulchan Aruch Paskins. Imtosh hiskla betfilas achol gomer osa bracha shnizkar b'shata umasklo shel Shabbos. And it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter which bracha you're in. If you're in an atachonein, you're in a later one. You always go back. Doesn't matter which bracha. With Ma'ariv, Shachris, Musaf, Mincha. Some say the Shulchan Aruch does quote by Musaf you have to stop where you are. Some say you have to stop where you are. Connected to this is the Trumas Hadeshen. Right, the Beis Yosef quotes the Trumas Hadeshen, Rabbi Yisrael Isserlin, who, why did he name his Sefer Trumas Hadeshen? Because he has Deshen, 354 Shilas and Shuvas in the Sefer. Some say he wrote the Shilas himself. He wrote it in question and answer form. But there he talks about, what if you say the word Ata, and then you remember? That happens sometimes. Says the Trumas Hadeshen, and it's quoted in the Shulchan Aruch also. Im hischalom or ata chonein umiyad kashamar tevas ata nizkar kodem shamar chonein. You remember after the word ata, so nobody knows. You could just say ata kidashta. You were about to say chonein. So im savar shuchal, if you really think it was a weekday and you're davening the weekday, then all of a sudden after the word ata, you remember it's Shabbos, which is very unusual. But then you should keep going and finish the bracha, because then that's atachonin bracha. But if you just were, you know it's Shabbos. Of course you know it's Shabbos. You're dressed for Shabbos, and you're just like your mouth takes you. But if and then you would just continue with kidashta or ata echad. And even the Beis Yosef, the Shulchan Aruch quotes this, even if you said ata, but you know it's Shabbos. But you said the word ata, mikol makom, that's continued ta b'tfilas Shabbos bezu lezu, and therefore you would just go, that's not called a mistake, and you would just go back to Yisbach Moshe without finishing the bracha. So the Shulchan Aruch says, quotes this. Avalim haya yodeshu Shabbos, source 51. V'shalo b'kavana hiskol tevas ata. Afilim hu b'tfilas shacharis. Even if you're in shacharis, eino gomer brachas atachonein. If you said ata and you knew it was Shabbos, you just go back to Yisbach Moshe Matas Chelko, because that's not called a toss. The Magen Avram though argues and says that doesn't matter what you were thinking. If you said the word ata, so it's by Shacharis or Ma'ariv, not like the Tzuras Hadeshem where you finish the bracha. No, if you just said the word ata and you caught yourself, even if you were thinking it was weekday, you would still just continue the Shabbos Shemona Esrei. Im Amar, says the Magen Avram, Ba'arvisu mincha ata v'savar shuchol omer ata kidashta o ata achad lo mikrias chala b'shal chol. That's you just had wrong kavana, but that's not called a halacha, and that's what the Isha Yisrael, the most classic contemporary sefer on Hilchos Tefillah, passes like the Magen Avram. If you just said the word ata, you don't have to finish the bracha. You just have to go to ata achad or ata kidashta in those cases. In Nizkar Ta'uso, and that's what he says in Oz Beis, in source 53, in Nizkar Ta'uso, Acharei Sha'ama, Rak Tevas Ata, V'yadayin Lo Himshich, Imay came b'tfilas leil Shabbos o mincha. So then you just so ata kidashta. V'yavim I Ta'uso machmash shasover tzorlis pala yon tfilas chol, like we saw in the Magen Avram. But if it was Shachris, so as he mentions, but he says, if you finished the whole Shmona Esrei and you didn't mention Shabbos at all, that's what he says towards the end, then you weren't Yosef, you have to daven again. If you didn't mention Shabbos at all in the Shmona Esrei. Good. The Bir Halacha also talks about this, that there's no distinction if a person has already passed Atachonein and catches a mistake with a later bracha. It doesn't matter. You finish the bracha, says the Bir Halacha. So what happens if you daven the wrong Shabbos Shmona Esrei? So the Shulchan Aruch quotes the Shibali Haleket. Hatov b'hil Shabbos v'echlev shel zu bazu eino choser. If you daven Ma'ariv instead of Shachris instead of Mincha, you don't go back. V'yesh omer, and some say for Musaf you have to go back. Again, because Musaf is different. Musaf is not just Rachami, and therefore it could be different. But the other tefillas you would say. If you daven the Friday night, again, the Shachris, the Taz explains, because Iker, Bracha, Revius, He Ritzeinu V'Mnuchaseinu, and that is equal for all of the Shmona Esreis. The Yalkut Yosef does say if you finished and you daven the wrong one, and you daven Shachris instead of Musaf, then just have Kavanah go to the Chazan and say, have me in mind, and then focus on it during Chazaras HaShatz and don't answer Baruch Hu Baruch Shemo. Okay, those are some of the mistakes that happen. Last topic, just to mention, Tashlumin for missed tfilos. Tashlumin missed tfilos. Let's say you missed Shachris, davening to minchas. So there is an Eishal Avram in Siman Kuf Ches, which says that you should daven the tefillah that you missed. If you're davening two minchas, one of them should be the Shachar Shmona Esrei. That is not the Minhag Olam. We generally assume that the Pri Megadim, the Eishal Avram, the Pri Megadim, there are two Eishal Avrams in the back. But the Eishal Avram, the Pri Megadim, which is the commentary on the Magen Avram, in source number 60, he says, no, whatever you're doing, you do two of those. You're davening two, remember, Musaf is not covered by Tashlumin. If you're davening two Shachrises, you don't daven Ma'ariv and Shachris. Two Shachrises, right? Whatever, that's the Minhag. That's what the Minchas Pri says in source 61. There's a lot of lumdus here between this machlokas achronim, right? Are you davening your prior tefillah at a later stage? Is that what tashlumin is? Or no, you could daven the later tefillah and it could count for what you did before. So that's what we generally paskin at that time, and that's what the Yalkut Yosef also says. That is what we assume that you make up. It's interesting that if you missed And this is a question in the Rishonim. Let's say I miss Mincha on Shabbos. I could daven 2 Ma'ariv. Ma'ariv, I'm davening 2 weekday Shemona Esreis. 2 weekday Shemona Esreis, even though I missed a Shabbos one. Right, this comes up, the Rishonim discuss a fascinating. Let's say I remember Mincha on Rosh Chodesh, I forgot Yalav Yavo. I don't remember till the nighttime. So it's as if I didn't daven. I have to daven 2 Ma'ariv. So I'm going to daven a Ma'ariv without Yalav Yavo. So that's called Lo Yarviach Klum. That's a Machlokas Rishonim. Tosfos and Brachas, 2 days. About whether you're not going to help out. Or are you? We paskin you do. You do daven again. Anyway, fascinating discussion. But that is all about tashlumin. So we discuss musaf and all the different elements of musaf and mincha and eating before musaf and tashlumin and mistakes. We look forward to the next year, which B'ez Hashem will be about Talmud Torah, Shnai Mikra V'Echad Targum, and Kriyas HaTorah on Shabbos. Have a great day.